Later, Thomas was resting in a siding when Percy arrived in the yard. Percy pulled his trucks to a large hopper to load them with coal. Thomas was still being cheeky. "Careful, Percy," he warned. "Watch out with those silly trucks." Go on," muttered the trucks as Percy pulled each one under the hopper. "And by the way," Thomas went on, "those buffers don't look very safe to me." But he got no further. With a tremendous bump, the last truck passed the hopper much too fast. The coal poured down all over Thomas. "Help! I'm choking!" cried Thomas. "Get me out!" Percy was worried. He couldn't help laughing. Thomas's smart blue paint was covered in coal dust from smokebox to bunker. "Ha ha!" chuckled Percy. "You don't look really useful now, Thomas. You look really disgraceful." "I'm not disgraceful," choked Thomas. "You did that on purpose. Get me out." It took the men so long to clean Thomas that he wasn't in time for his next train. Toby had to take Annie and Clarabelle instead. "Poor Thomas," whispered Annie to Clarabelle. They were most upset. Thomas was upset too. He was very grumpy in the shed that night. Toby thought it a great joke, but Percy was cross with Thomas for thinking that he had made Thomas's paint dirty on purpose. Fancy a really useful blue engine like Thomas becoming a disgrace to the Fat Controller's Railway, said Percy. "Pooh, I wouldn't have missed all that fun for anything," he chuckled. Thomas was at the platform the next day when Percy had brought his trucks in from the junction. The trucks were heavy and "I feel so tired," Percy puffed as he pulled into the station. "Have a drink," said his driver, "then you'll feel better." The water column stood at the end of the siding with the unsafe buffers. The props underneath the buffers were old and needed mending. Percy moved forward and found that he couldn't stop. The buffers didn't stop him either. "Oh!" wailed Percy. "Help!" The buffers were broken and Percy was wheel deep in coal. It was time for Thomas to leave. He had seen everything. "Now Percy has learnt his lesson too," he chuckled to himself. That night the two engines made up their quarrel. "I didn't cause your accident on purpose, Thomas," whispered Percy. "You do know that, don't you?" "Of course," replied Thomas, "and I'm sorry I was cheeky. Your green paint looks splendid again too. In future, we'll both be more careful of coal," said Thomas wisely. Saved from scrap. The Fat Controller works his engines hard, but they are always very proud when he calls them really useful. "I'm going to the scrapyard today," Edward called to Thomas. "What? Already? You're not that old," replied Thomas cheekily. The scrapyard is full of rusty old cars and machinery. They are broken into pieces, loaded into trucks, brought to the yard to be broken into trucks, and Edward pulls them to the steelworks where they are melted down and used again. One day, when Edward arrived in the yard, there was a surprise waiting for him. It was a traction engine. "Hello," said Edward. "You're not broken and rusty. What are you doing here?" "I'm Trevor," said the traction engine sadly. "They're going to break me up next week." "What a shame," said Edward. "My driver says I only need some paint, polish and oil to be as good as new," Trevor went on sadly. "But my master says I'm old-fashioned." Edward snorted. "People say I'm old-fashioned, but I don't care. The Fat Controller says that I'm a useful engine." "What work did you do?" he asked. "My master used to send us from farm to farm. We threshed corn, hauled logs and did lots of other work. We made friends at all the farms. The children loved to see us." Trevor shut his eyes, remembering. "Oh yes, I like children," he said. Edward set off for the station. "Broken up, what a shame. Broken up, what a shame," he clanked as he went back to work. "I must tell Trevor, I must." He thought of all his friends who liked engines, but strangely none of them would have room for a traction engine at home. It's a shame," Edward hissed as he went over the viaduct. Then he brought his coaches to the station. "Peep, peep," he whistled. "Why didn't I think of him before?" There, on the platform, was the very person. "Hello, Edward, you look upset," said the man. "What's the matter, Charlie?" he asked the driver. "There's a traction engine in the scrapyard, Vicar. He'll be broken up next week. Jem Cole says he never drove a better engine." "Do save him, sir. He saws wood and gives children rides," said Edward. "We'll see," replied the vicar. Jem Cole came on Saturday. "The Reverend's coming to see you, Trevor. Maybe he'll buy you." "Do you think he will?" asked Trevor hopefully. "He will when I've lit your fire and cleaned you up," said Jem. The vicar and his two boys arrived that evening. Trevor hadn't felt so happy for months. He chuffered happily around the yard. "Show your paces, Trevor," said the vicar. Later, the vicar came out of the office smiling. "I've got him cheap, Jem, cheap." Jem was very pleased and ran to tell Trevor the good news. "Do you hear that, Trevor?" cried Jem. "The Reverend saved you and you live at the vicarage now." "Peep, peep," whistled Trevor happily. Now Trevor's home is in the vicarage orchard, and he sees Edward every day. His paint is spotless and his brass shines like gold. Trevor likes his work, but his happiest day is the church fete. Then, with a wooden seat bolted to his bunker, he chuffers round the orchard, giving rides to children. Long afterwards, you will see him shut his eyes, remembering. "I like children," he whispers happily.